Get off my Marine! Off him! Now! 3 steps. Boots on plywood. A hand the size of a catcher's mitt closing on her upper arm above the elbow and pulling hard, the way a man pulls a child away from a hot stove. Captain Hollis Ainsley came up half a step and stopped at the limit of his grip. Her gloved hands lifted clear of Lance Corporal Wyatt Hendricks's open abdomen. They came up wet. They did not shake. The tent was 24 feet by 24. Canvas, double-poled. 6 battle lanterns hung from the ridge and washed the plywood floor white. Outside, the Case-Vac Humvee idled 15 feet from the flap, doors open, body camera on the dash facing in. On the ridge above the entry flap, a small black surveillance camera blinked once and went on blinking. The time on the trauma flow sheet at the head of the table read 22:54 and 30 seconds local. The date was Tuesday, the 28th of April, 2026. The place was Camp Wilson, Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, 29 Palms, California. The patient on the table was an unconscious Marine with a chest tube and a 7-centimeter midline incision and a hepatic laceration that had been about to kill him. Sergeant Bo Carmichael was 28 years old, 6'1", 210 pounds, plain green utilities, desert dust on the front of his blouse and on the toes of his boots, dried blood on his right forearm, a fresh smear of it on the back of his left hand. He was shaking. He had registered 2 facts the moment he came under the canvas, and he had read both of them wrong. A male doctor at the far side of the table. An unmarked woman with both hands inside his Marine. He had moved on the woman. You don't. That's my Marine. That is my Marine on that table. She did not look at him. She did not look at his hand. She held where she was, half a step off the table. Her eyes went back down to the wound she had just left. Pack high. The voice was level. The voice did not change. 2 words to Lieutenant Commander Reese Breyer across the patient. Breyer had not moved. He had a scalpel in his right hand. He had a suction in his left. The suction in his left hand pulled a soft, wet sound out of the abdomen, and the sound was the loudest thing in the tent. He moved the pack into her sight line with his left hand, without taking the suction off the field. She took the pack. Her hand went back in. The narrator notes the hand on her arm as a fact. She filed it where it belonged. 2 units, whole blood. Now. Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class. Jules Tatum was at the head of the table, 26 years old, 2nd Class Corpsman, 2 enlistments on his right shoulder, and a quiet aspiration to nursing school on his left. He had been bagging Hendricks for 9 minutes. He was bagging Hendricks now. He had not stopped bagging Hendricks the entire time Carmichael's voice had been in the tent. He did not stop now. At the foot of the table, Hospitalman 3rd Class Devora Quint hung the 2nd unit of whole blood and watched her pressure cuff and said nothing. Behind Carmichael, the tent flap was held open by a lance corporal who was looking at his sergeant the way a man looks at someone he is not sure he knows anymore. Half a dozen Marines from Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines stood in a loose half-arc across the threshold. Nobody came in. Breyer turned his head 3 degrees toward the Marine. He was 36, 5'9", slight. The kind of doc whose voice did not carry past the bed. He did not raise it now. He looked at Carmichael across the open belly of the Marine's automatic rifleman. His eyes held the Marine the way a man holds a piece of glass that is about to fall. The corners of his mouth did not move. He had known who she was for the 90 seconds since she stepped under the canvas. He had not said it yet. He was about to. She's lead. 2 words. Full tent volume. Breyer had never spoken at that volume in his life. He spoke at it now. The volume hit Carmichael's hand, and Carmichael's hand opened. The hand fell off her smock. Carmichael stumbled back a step. The lance corporal at the flap let the flap fall against his shoulder. Ainsley did not look up. "Light, 2 o'clock." Tatum reached up with his free hand and reseated the headlamp on her cap with 2 fingers. The lamp found the inferior hepatic surface, a 5-centimeter laceration into segment 7, dark venous flood under the rim of the liver. She knew the wound at 1 second. Her hands knew the wound at half a second. The ventilator hissed once. The saline drip onto the plywood ticked twice. The tent held the silence the way a held breath holds a chest. 43 minutes since the truck had rolled on the Camp Wilson access road. 18 of that on the Humvee floor. 6 since Breyer had cracked the chest. The clock was hers. She ran the Pringle maneuver one-handed, index and middle finger, to the hepatoduodenal ligament, vascular pedicle compressed against her thumb, and her right hand was already feeding the pack into the parenchymal split. Suction. Breyer gave her suction. The pool dropped 2 centimeters in 3 seconds, and the laceration surfaced. Atraumatic. Breyer put the clamp into her right hand. She crossed the clamp under the lobe and seated it on the hepatic vein branch with 1 rotation of her wrist. The dark flood stopped. The tent could hear the saline tick onto the plywood again. The pulse oximeter at the head of the table had been reading 83 for 2 minutes. It moved. 85. 87. Tatum said the number out loud as it crossed 90. Quint at the foot of the table read the line pressure off the cuff. Systolic 72, 78, 84. Ainsley did not look up. Pack 2. Breyer passed Pack 2. Time. 2 minutes 10 on the Pringle. She rotated the clamp off and released the ligament. The pack held. The number on the screen held. The number on the cuff went to 90/60. Tatum exhaled for the first time since the tent had gone quiet and wrote it on the trauma flow sheet. She had not raised her voice. She had not raised her eyes. She had told the room what she needed in 2 words at a time, and the room had handed it to her. Breyer, without moving his eyes off the field, spoke for the first time at conversational volume. He spoke to the room, not to Carmichael, not to anyone. 18 minutes on the floor, transient hypotension, segment 7 hepatic laceration, controlled bleeder. Pringle 2 minutes 10. No reperfusion arrhythmia. We've got him. Quint sat down on the empty gurney behind her. She stood back up. Carmichael had not moved from where he stopped. Behind him, the flap was still on the lance corporal's shoulder. The lance corporal was staring. Carmichael's mouth was open. He looked at Ainsley's hands. He looked at her face. He looked at Breyer, who was not looking at him. The dust on the toes of Carmichael's boots was still on his boots. The blood on the back of his left hand was starting to dry. He looked at the woman in the smock. He looked at the words above the smock, where a name tape should have been. There was no name tape. There had never been a name tape. He had not known that. He had not thought to know that. He had moved. She's a... Who? Who is she? Nobody answered. Breyer was reading the flow sheet over Tatum's shoulder. Ainsley was closing the abdomen for transport. Quint was hanging the 3rd unit. The casevac driver leaned in through the flap at 2300 and said, "Bird spinning, Doc. 5 minutes." Breyer said, "Roger." Quint pushed the transport gurney up to the side of the table. Ainsley closed the fascia at 2303. Tatum tied the last running stitch on the skin at 2306. They moved Hendricks to the transport gurney by the count of 3. The lap pads stayed in. The pressure dressings went on. The portable monitor came across with him. The IV poles came with him. The whole train of equipment around a man whose life is being held in a knot of cloth and a clamp moved as one thing toward the flap. Carmichael was in the way. He did not realize he was in the way. He realized when the gurney stopped 6 inches from his right knee. Breyer said without looking at him, "Sergeant." Move! Carmichael moved. The gurney went past him out through the flap. The narrator notes the small, dawning, sick feeling of a man who has just done something his future self is going to have to live next to for a very long time. He had it now. He did not yet know what to do with it. He stood with his boots in the dust and watched the casevac doors close, and watched the bird lift into the dark of Camp Wilson at 2309, and watched the rotor wash, blow his utility blouse flat against his ribs. Inside the tent, Ainsley pulled the smock off her shoulders, dropped it in the biohazard bin, and walked out the back flap to the portable sink to wash her hands. She did not look at the front flap. She did not look at the casevac pad. She washed her hands for the full 60 seconds, and she dried them on a clean towel, and she went back inside to write the trauma report. By 6:40 the next morning, Carmichael was on his cot in the Bravo Company tent, and 3 Marines from his fire team were in a loose triangle around him. They did not ask him what had happened. They told him. Quietly. In the voice you use to give a man back a version of himself he can stand up under. She had no rank tape, Sergeant. She had no name tape either. Looked like a contractor. Looked like a tech. You pulled her because you didn't know. Anyone would have, Sergeant. Any one of us. Carmichael did not say anything for a long time. He held a paper cup of coffee. He looked at the cup. He said, low. I didn't know who she was. Corporal Ansel Drover, 23, the youngest of his team leaders, said, nobody could have known, Sergeant. She wasn't dressed for it. First Sergeant Roland Beck came in at 6:52. He was 51, a 28-year Marine, gray at the temples, the kind of man who had spent his last 6 years protecting his company from its own paperwork. He looked at Carmichael. He looked at Drover. He looked at the cot. He did not ask. He said, walk with me, Sergeant. Behind the chow tent at 6:58, Beck lit a cigarette and read Carmichael's face once. Tell me she's not going to file. Carmichael said nothing. Beck nodded. All right. You panicked. You pulled an unmarked surgical tech off your wounded Marine. You did it in front of 4 people. The Humvee body cam saw it. The tent ridge camera saw it. The corpsman saw it. He took one slow drag. Now I'm going to tell you what happened. You ready, Sergeant? First, Sergeant, Don't. You arrived in panic. You believed Hendricks was being touched by someone unqualified. You acted to protect a Marine. You apologized within the minute. You did not pull on her with force. Do you remember it that way, Sergeant? Carmichael looked at his hands. He said, yes, First Sergeant. Good. Then that's the way it happened. The narrator notes for the record that it is not the way it happened. At 8:30, Ainsley was at the portable sink behind the BAS tent. She had been on her feet for 16 hours. Her green utilities were the green utilities she had walked into the tent in on Tuesday afternoon. Her boots were the boots she had landed in. She was washing her hands at the sink, with her sleeves rolled to the elbow and her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun under a green ball cap. Tatum came up and stood at a respectful distance and waited. She turned. She had not heard him come up because she had heard him come up and chosen not to acknowledge it for 14 seconds. He held out a meal card. Ma'am. On the back of the meal card he had written, in pencil, a list. The time the casevac body camera had been on. The time the tent ridge camera had been on. The names of every person in the tent at 22:54. What each of them had been doing with each of their hands. What had been said by whom, in what order. She looked at the meal card. She looked at Tatum. She said, HM2. Ma'am, don't lose this. She did not take it. She left it in his hand. And don't sign anything anyone writes for you. HM2. You write what you saw. Yes, ma'am. By 1100, the story had crossed Bravo Company. By 1300, it had reached the battalion mess. By 1700, it had reached the regiment in the version Beck had written. In Beck's version, the sergeant had arrived in panic, had believed an unqualified woman was touching his Marine, had lifted her clear in the gentlest way the circumstance allowed, had apologized inside a minute, and had been instrumental in the casualty's survival because his timely action freed the senior surgeon to take over. By dinner mess, the version had a small set of phrases the battalion chief of staff used when he repeated it. The phrases were not Beck's. The phrases were the chief of staff's. The version was Beck's. This is the part where the room closes. This is the part of a story like this where the woman alone becomes the woman alone with paperwork against her. This is also the part where if you have ever watched a story like hers happen to someone you love and felt yourself wishing the room would not close, the room is about to not close. Hit the subscribe button, stay with her, watch what happens next. At 1714, Ainsley walked back into the BAS tent and read on the duty board in red marker that her field medical credentialing tracker had been flagged for review. The credentialing flag was a one-line entry typed at 1707 by a clerk who did not know what she was being told to enter. The line read, "Review pending. Verification of surgical privileges. Possible field care breach." Above the clerk in the chain was a master sergeant whose son had served under Carmichael 2 years ago. Above him was a captain in the regimental administrative shop whose evening drink Beck bought twice a month. None of this was in the entry. All of it was in the air. Ainsley read the line. She took a green field notebook from her left thigh pocket. She wrote the line in pencil. She wrote 1802 next to it. She wrote "received" in small caps. She closed the notebook. The notebook had no name on the cover. It had 10 years on its spine. Beck's second move came up on the duty board at 1811. A base provost incident note time-stamped Wednesday 12/14, alleging that an unescorted civilian-appearing female had been observed entering a controlled medical area without a sponsor. The note named no one. The note described a 5'7" woman with blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun, plain green utilities, no insignia. The complainant signed as Concerned NCO, name withheld. The note routed to the provost duty desk and got a control number. The control number got attached to Ainsley's working file at the medical ops cell by 1640. She wrote it in the notebook. 1811. Provost note. Control number attached. Name withheld complainant. At 1908, Beck found Tatum at the end of the chow line. Beck stood behind him in the queue and spoke at conversational volume with the warmth of an uncle. HM2. Hard night the other night. Hard day, too. Listen, when JAG pulls you in, and they will, I want you to know nobody's going to hold the way you remember it against you. Memory's a tricky animal under stress. Nobody is going to be upset if your statement reflects what you can be sure of versus what you think you saw under fluorescent light at zero dark with someone yelling. You hear me, son? Tatum looked at his tray. He said, I hear you, First Sergeant. Beck clapped him on the shoulder. Good lad. Tatum walked the tray to the corner of the chow tent. He sat down. He cut his chicken patty into 4 pieces. He said, to no one, into the steam off the beans. I'm not your lad. Ainsley was eating alone in the corner 2 tables over. He stood up with his tray. He walked across. He put his tray down opposite hers. He did not sit. He said, Ma'am, First Sergeant Beck just told me to remember it differently than I remember it. She did not stop chewing. She nodded once. She said, Eat your food, HM2. He sat. He ate his food. At the tray returned, she said, Lo, write it tonight. Sign it. Email it from your personal address to the regimental JAG, and copy your division JAG, and copy yourself. Use the words you used when you told me. Mom. By 2200, Wednesday Ainsley had a green notebook with 7 entries in it. Time, action, name, witness. She had not raised her voice once all day. She had not called anyone in her chain of command. She had not pulled rank. She had eaten 3 meals on her feet. The credentialing flag was still on the duty board. The provost note still had a control number. The story in the regimental mess was still the story Beck had written. She washed her hands at the sink behind the BAS tent at 22:14. 24 hours to the minute since Carmichael's hand had closed on her arm. She wiped them on a clean towel. She walked back inside to do the night triage. She did not need a chain. She had her own. She had a green notebook and a phone with 3 numbers in it, and 22 years of knowing how a room moved when a room decided to move on a woman. She had been written down by men like Beck before. She had outlasted them every time. The trick of outlasting men like Beck was the same trick as the Pringle maneuver. You did not panic. You found the bleeder. You put your hand on the bleeder. You did not let go. She wrote one more line in the notebook at 22:06. Watcher present. Breyer. Duty board. Not spoken. She closed the notebook. She put the notebook back in her left thigh pocket. She tied the cargo flap down. In a corner of the BAS tent at 22:10, Tatum sat on a folding chair with a yellow legal pad on his knee. He wrote, in pencil, in the left-handed slant he had not used in school, but used now because it was clearer, the words of his statement. He wrote the time he had come on shift. He wrote the time the case vac call had come in. He wrote the time Ainsley had walked under the canvas. He wrote what she had said. He wrote what Breyer had said. He wrote what Carmichael had said. In quotes, all 3 lines. He wrote what the body camera had been doing. He wrote what the ridge camera had been doing. He wrote his own hand on the bag at the head of the table for 31 consecutive minutes. He did not editorialize. He did not characterize. He wrote what he had seen with the words he had used at the chow tent. He signed it. He dated it. He folded it. He put it in the breast pocket of his utility blouse next to the meal card. Breyer was at the duty board in the dark of the back of the tent, his hands in his pockets, reading the credentialing flag. He turned when she walked in. He did not say anything. He just nodded at the board, once, the small, slow nod of a man who had decided to make a phone call. Breyer dialed a 619 number on his personal cell phone at 22:36. He sat on a folding chair in the plywood cubicle behind the BAS tent. The line picked up on the second ring. The voice on the other end was 58, gravel and amused. Reese, you only call me at this hour when somebody's about to ruin somebody else's life. Who's ruining whose? Sir, I have Captain Hollis Ainsley out here at 29 Palms. There is a sergeant in 17 who put hands on her in my tent on Tuesday night while she was running a damage control lap on a hepatic. The first sergeant of that company is shaping statements as we speak. There is a credentialing flag against her on the duty board. There is a provost note in her working file. The voice on the other end went still. Was she dressed? Smock. No rank, no name tape, working sterile. And she did the lap. Yes, sir. Pringle 2 minutes 10. The Marine is alive. Reese, don't move. Don't write anything. Don't call anyone else. I will handle this from here. Yes, sir. Reese, tell me her notebook is going. Sir, her notebook is going. Good. Rear Admiral Hank Pemberton, Medical Corps, United States Navy, Marine Corps surgeon, sat at his desk in the Marine Corps surgeon's office at Naval Medical Center San Diego for 1 minute and 20 seconds without moving. The office was dark except for the desk lamp and the green glow of the secure terminal. There was a photograph on the desk of his daughter in dress blues at her commissioning. There was a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. There was a file in the top right drawer marked Ainsley, H. Sost West. Positioned March 2018. That he had not opened in 4 years. He did not open it now. He did not need to. He picked up the secure line. He dialed the Combat Center Commanding General's office. He said, "Bill, Hank, we need to talk about a sergeant in your 1-7. The Combat Center Commanding General listened for 2 minutes without speaking. The Combat Center Commanding General said, "Hank, send me what you have. I will have his battalion commander on the pad by 0700. Pemberton said, "Bill, I will be on the speakerphone at 0900. The Combat Center Commanding General said, "Roger that, Hank." At 2314, a second casualty came onto the Camp Wilson Casevac pad. Sergeant Mireille Vanier, female engineer, mid-30s. Blast injury from a separate training mishap on the breach lane. Ainsley was on her in 11 seconds. The same hands, the same ear. She listened for breath sounds and got air on the left and nothing on the right. She listened for tympanic resonance over the right hemithorax and got the high, hollow note of a chest under tension. She listened for the second pulse rhythm in the carotid that told her how much volume was left and got a thready 48. She called a needle decompression at the second intercostal mid-clavicular before the corpsman had the chest seal off the pack. 14 gauge, right side. 2. The corpsman put a 14-gauge angiocath in her right hand. She seated it at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular, 90 degrees to the chest wall, slow and even. The hiss of escaping air was audible across the pad. Vanier's chest rose. The carotid jumped to 72. The corpsman exhaled. She was right. She was always right. Vanier stabilized inside the first 3 minutes. She read Vanier the way a builder reads a wall. The wall told her where the load was. She put a needle through the load. Breyer stood at the back of the pad at 23:42 with a mug of coffee in his hand. He looked at her across the dark. He said, "Hollis, they're going to come at you tomorrow. Hank knows." She said, "Reese." She did not say thank you. She did not need to. They stood. They drank coffee. The rotors of the second casevac wound down behind them. He asked if your notebook was going. What did you tell him? That it was. At 23:51, the duty clerk in the medical ops cell sat up sharply at her terminal. The credentialing flag on Ainsley's record had just been removed. The Provost Notes control number had just been administratively reassigned. A new note had appeared in the working file. Open investigation. Suspected retaliatory documentation. Subject: First Sergeant Roland Beck, USMC. She read it 3 times. She did not call anyone. She closed the window. She wrote nothing. The institution does not always recognize one of its own. When it does, it moves the way water moves through a closed pipe, out of sight, on no one's clock but its own. If you have ever sat at the end of an unfair week and watched the pipe stay closed and waited for the open, you knew was coming and watched it not come. Hit the subscribe button. The pipe is opening. Carmichael was on his cot in the Bravo Company tent at 23:53. His phone vibrated. The text was from a number he did not recognize. The text was one line. "She's a captain, Sergeant. Medical Corps, Silver Star." The text was followed by nothing. She sat on the edge of the cot in her green utilities, boots off, socks on. There was a Nalgene bottle on the floor beside her. There was no light on. She was reading a printed page in the glow of her phone screen. The page was an after-action report from a deployed surgical mission in March 2018, 2 miles outside Mosul. It was her own report. She had not looked at it for 4 years, and then she had started reading it once a year on the anniversary. She was reading it now because Reese was right, because Hank knew, and because the institution that was moving on her behalf was moving because of this page. Mosul, Iraq, the 11th of March, 2018, 1442. Local. Then Lieutenant Commander Hollis Ainsley, Special Operations Surgical Team Forward of an Army Special Forces ODA. A mud-walled courtyard 2 miles south of an active urban breach. The patient was Sergeant First Class Eli Vargas, 31, JTAC, calling close air for the breach team. Fragmentation injury to the abdomen, anterior and posterior, large vessel injury suspected, hemodynamic collapse en route. They put him on a folding pole litter on the dirt floor because there was no table. Indirect fire was landing 2 streets over. The SOST team was Ainsley. Anesthesia provider Lieutenant Maris Voigt, call sign Hart, 4 years her partner. Alive then. Surgical Tech Petty Officer Diego Salinas, 3 people. 1 patient. No table. A mortar landing every 90 seconds. They opened Vargas at 1446. The bleeder was the supramesenteric vein. The splenic flexure of the colon was split. Ainsley clamped the SMV at 1451. She packed the flexure at 1453. She sutured the venous defect at 1504. She closed the abdomen at 1509, 23 minutes. The patient was air evacuated to Herbal at 1531. He survived the flight. He survived the next surgery. He survived Walter Reed. He retired 4 years later as a master sergeant. He lived outside Asheville. He ran a beekeeping operation with his daughter. The Silver Star citation read, "With disregard for her own safety, under indirect fire." The citation did not say the courtyard floor was mud. It did not say Voigt's hands were on the airway for 19 minutes without break. It did not say what Salinas said when they closed. It did not need to. She put the phone down on the cot at 0031 Thursday. She did not cry. She had not cried for a patient in 12 years. She had not cried for a teammate in 3. She thought about Voigt. She thought about Voigt's small left hand on the bag for 19 minutes. She thought about the last message from Voigt. The message before the Hadramaut. The message before Hart went off the net. And she did not let herself think about it for very long. She drank from the Nalgene. She put on her boots. She walked back out into the BAS tent for the second half of the night shift. She had not earned the right to be tired. In the regimental administrative shop at 0044, hospital man apprentice Cole Yetter sat at the duty terminal. He was 19. He was the duty clerk on the regimental graveyard shift. He was filing the 3rd paper of his shift. The paper was a request for transcription of the CaseVac body camera footage from the Tuesday night call. The paper was signed by Lieutenant Commander Reese Breyer, USN Medical Corps. The CaseVac body camera footage on the secure server was 14 minutes long. The 14th minute showed a non-commissioned officer with a sergeant's chevrons on his collar and dust on the toes of his boots, pulling a woman in a sterile surgical smock off a Marine on a table by her upper arm. Yetter watched the 14th minute. He watched it twice. He filed the transcription request. The trap closed at the speed of a clerk pressing enter. Yetter did not know that. Yetter was 19. His shift ended at 600. He was thinking about breakfast. The transcription request routed to the Combat Center JAG office at 0046. It was read by a major at 0618. It was on the regimental commander's desk by 0730. It was on Lieutenant Colonel Cyrus Halverson's desk by 0746. It was on the Combat Center, Commanding General's desk by 0814. By 0900, Sergeant Bo Carmichael's name had been spoken aloud in 3 offices that had not known it on Wednesday. Ainsley re-entered the BAS tent at 0036. She washed her hands at the sink. She turned to the duty board. The credentialing flag was gone. In its place, a small green dot. She did not see Breyer in the dark behind the cubicle watching her see it. She did not need to. By 1100, Thursday 1st Sergeant Beck had typed a 5-paragraph sworn statement on a battalion laptop. He printed it on company letterhead. He had Carmichael sign it. The statement described the events of Tuesday night in the controlled cadence of a man who had written this kind of paragraph before. It alleged that Sergeant Carmichael had acted to protect a Marine from unauthorized intervention. It alleged that Ainsley had no displayed rank or credential at the time of the action and was, to a reasonable observer, in the role of fire team leader, a non-credentialed person practicing surgery without authority. The statement requested that the assault charge be dropped and a counter-complaint be filed against Captain Ainsley for unauthorized practice. Beck signed it. Carmichael signed it. The statement routed at 11:14. Beck put his hand on Carmichael's shoulder at 11:15 and said, "We're going to make this go away, son." "Yes, First Sergeant." At 11:46, a copy of the statement appeared, by hand delivery from a corporal, on Breyer's desk in the BAS tent. Breyer read it twice. He put it down. He said, "To no one?" "All right." He walked across the tent to the cubicle where Ainsley was reviewing the night's flow sheets. He handed her the statement. He said, "Hollis, they've gone in writing." She read it. She nodded once. She said, "Reese, tell Hank." Breyer nodded. Breyer left. At 12:30, the second-hand delivery arrived. Carmichael himself, in clean utilities, escorted by Beck. They came into the BAS tent. The tent was full. 3 corpsmen, 2 patients, Breyer, Tatum, Ainsley at the back cubicle. Beck addressed her at conversational volume from the entry flap. "Ma'am, the sergeant has a courtesy copy of his statement for you, as required." Carmichael walked the length of the tent with a manila folder in his right hand. He did not look at Breyer. He did not look at Tatum. He stopped 2 feet from Ainsley. He looked at the manila folder. He held it out. "Ma'am." She took the folder. She did not open it. She held it in her left hand. She looked at his face. She held his eyes. She did not stop looking at him for 4 seconds. Then she did the thing she had not done all week. She smiled. The smile was small. The smile was not warm. The smile was the smile of a woman who had been in a great many rooms and had watched a great many men do what Carmichael had just done, and had watched what came after, and had filed it. The smile was 1/2 centimeter at one corner of her mouth, and it did not move her eyes. Carmichael saw it. He had grown up with 3 older sisters and a mother who taught 5th grade for 31 years. He had been smiled at by women his whole life. He had been smiled at warmly and coldly and pityingly and tiredly, and sometimes wrongly. He had never been smiled at the way this woman was smiling at him now. The smile was the smile a surgeon gave a wound she had already counted. The smile was the smile a sniper gave a target the wind had already given her. The smile was the smile of a person who was not angry with him and had no need to be angry with him because the room they were both in was about to take care of being angry with him on her behalf. Carmichael's mouth went dry. The folder in his hand felt too light. He felt his own pulse in his neck for the first time since Tuesday night. Beck, from the entry flap, saw her see Carmichael and did not see the smile. Breyer saw the smile and turned his face away because he did not want to be the doctor in this tent, who watched the woman in this tent hold this room. He had watched her hold a room outside Mosul in 2018, and he had watched her hold a room at Walter Reed in 2019, and he had no need to watch her hold a room at the Combat Center in 2026. The watching was unkind to her. He let her have it alone. "Thank you, Sergeant." "Ma'am." He walked back out. Beck followed. Beck did not look back. Tatum had watched the whole exchange from the corner of the tent with a flow sheet in his hand and his mouth slightly open. He walked across the tent and stood by the cubicle and waited. He said, "Ma'am." "HM2. Are you all right?" "HM2. I am very all right. Are you all right?" "Yes, ma'am." Then go finish the night flow sheets, please. She had been all right since the moment the hand closed on her arm on Tuesday night. The moment the hand closed on her arm was the moment she filed it. She had not been working since Tuesday. She had been waiting. Outside the tent, Carmichael stopped. He did not know why. He stood with his boots in the dust and looked at the canvas wall. He heard from inside 2 words in Breyer's voice, 2 units, and he heard Ainsley's voice answer, "Now," and the small, soft sound of a clamp being placed on a clean surgical tray. He stood there for a long time. Beck had to come back and lead him by the elbow. Friday morning, the 1st of May, 2026. The Combat Center Commanding General's office called a 0900 muster on the Battalion HQ parade pad. The formation was small, 42 Marines and sailors in a 3-rank wedge facing the HQ flagpole. Halvorsen at the front, his sergeant major a step behind, the regimental commander to his right, the Combat Center Provost Marshal, Major Lila Renteria, to his left. Carmichael was in the 2nd rank, Beck was in the 3rd. Ainsley was in green utilities, rank insignia on for the first time in 9 days. The small gold oak leaves of a Navy 06 fresh on her collar. She stood in a loose formation of 3 off the right side of the pad, with Breyer, Tatum, and Quint. She was not in the wedge. She was at one of the small canvas chairs placed for visitors at the edge of the pad. She did not sit. At 0901, Halvorsen leaned to the field, PA microphone. "Battalion, Attention." 42 pairs of boots came together in one sound on the pad. He turned the PA over to the speakerphone on the small folding table beside him. He said, "Sir, on the line." The speakerphone clicked. The voice came through, clear. 58, gravel. 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. This is Rear Admiral Hank Pemberton, Medical Corps, United States Navy, Marine Corps Surgeon. I am calling from Naval Medical Center, San Diego. I am about to read you a citation for which an officer in your area of operations was awarded the Silver Star in March of 2018. You will stand at attention while I read it. The pad did not move. Pemberton read. The citation was 1 paragraph. Mosul. Mud floor courtyard. Indirect fire on the perimeter. 23 minutes. A clamp on the supramesenteric vein. A sergeant first class who walked out. The patient's name. The unit's name. The line, with disregard for her own safety. The closing. By direction of the President, the Silver Star is awarded to Lieutenant Commander, now Captain, Hollis Ainsley, United States Navy, Medical Corps. Pemberton paused for a count of 2. She is your senior medical officer in this exercise. She has been since you arrived. She is also the woman one of your sergeants put hands on in a battalion aid station tent on Tuesday night, while she was working a damage control laparotomy on Lance Corporal Wyatt Hendricks. Lance Corporal Hendricks is alive because of her. He woke at 0612 this morning at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. He asked for her by the name on her smock, which was no name. He asked for the woman who would not let go of his liver. That woman is Captain Hollis Ainsley. Pemberton paused. 1st Battalion. Render honors. Halvorsen turned. He came to attention. He rendered a textbook hand salute across the pad to Ainsley. The regimental commander saluted. The sergeant major saluted. Major Renteria saluted. The wedge held for a heartbeat, and then, rank by rank, every Marine and sailor in the wedge saluted. Breyer saluted. Tatum saluted. Quint saluted. Carmichael, in the 2nd rank, his arm coming up because the men on either side of him were coming up, was the last salute on the pad. Halvorsen held his salute. Ainsley returned it. The pad held for 4 seconds. Carmichael's face moved 4 times in those 4 seconds. The first was confusion. The unmarked woman from the tent was wearing rank now, and the rank was bigger than his platoon commanders, and bigger than his company commanders, and bigger than his battalion commanders. The second was disbelief. The rank could not be hers, because if the rank was hers, then the hand on her arm on Tuesday night had been his hand. And the hand on her arm had been on the arm of a captain. And the captain was a silver star. And the silver star had been on the body of the woman he had pulled off his Marine. The third was recognition. The rank was hers. The fourth was horror. The last one stayed. Major Renteria stepped 3 paces forward. She had the charge sheet in her right hand. She read into the microphone the specifications. Assault on a senior commissioned officer in the execution of office. Article 128, Uniform Code of Military Justice. Conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Article 134. She read into the microphone a second specification. Obstruction of justice. Article 134, for the typed statement of Friday morning. She did not read Beck's name yet. She read, Sergeant Beau Carmichael, you are placed under restraint pending Article 32. 2 Marines from the duty section stepped out of the edge of the pad and approached Carmichael in the second rank. They did not touch him. They waited. Carmichael stepped forward, hands behind his back, and walked the 4 steps off the pad with the duty Marines on either side. Beck, in the third rank, was staring straight ahead. Beck's face had gone the color of unfinished plywood. Halverson lowered his salute. Ainsley lowered hers. The pad held the silence for one more breath. At the right edge of the pad, HM2 Jules Tatum exhaled for what felt like the first time since Tuesday night, and wrote the time on the back of his meal card. By 10:00, Friday Major Renteria was sitting across from Beck at a small steel table in the Combat Center Provost Marshal's office. She had the Friday morning typed statement in a clear sleeve. She had the CaseVac body camera transcription, the BAS Tent Ridge camera transcription, Breyer's surgical log, Tatum's signed statement, emailed Wednesday night and time-stamped, Yetter's filed transcription request, and a printout of the credentialing flag entry and its administrative reassignment. She laid them out on the table in front of Beck in the order they had been created. She did not say anything for a full minute. Beck looked at the table. Beck looked at his hands. I'd like an attorney. First Sergeant? Yes, you would. By 1400, Friday Beck was in pre-trial confinement at the Combat Center Brig on 3 specifications: obstruction of justice, false official statement, dereliction of duty. He was reduced to Master Sergeant on the report. By Saturday afternoon, 2 prior incidents surfaced: a hazing event in Bravo Company in November 2025 that Beck had papered as a rough housekeeping incident, a falsified field loss report in March 2026 for a missing night vision device that Carmichael had broken. By Monday, a third surfaced from 2024 involving a different sergeant. The institutional pipeline did not call any of these things by their old names anymore. It called them by their new names. It was the new names that went into Beck's file. In ICU bed 4 at Naval Medical Center San Diego on Friday the 8th of May at 11:14 local, Hendricks was awake. He was 21. He had a 4-day beard and an abdominal binder and a chest tube sight that had been pulled the day before. He was sitting up at 30 degrees, and a corpsman was feeding him chips of ice with a plastic spoon. The door opened. Ainsley walked in. She was in summer whites, short-sleeved white shirt, white slacks, the small gold oak leaves of a Navy 06 on her collar, the silver star ribbon over her left breast pocket, the surgical warfare device above it, 4 rows of ribbons under it. Hendricks looked at her for a long second. He said, voice rough, "Ma'am." She walked to the bed. She put her right hand flat on the white sheet over his right wrist, and she did not move it. Lance Corporal Hendricks. I know you, don't I? We've met. Are you the one who wouldn't let go of me? Yes. He looked at her, and his eyes did something quiet. Thank you, ma'am. You are very welcome, Lance Corporal. She did not tell him about the hand on her arm. He did not ask. The room he was in did not have room for that hand. The room he was in was a room he was alive in. That was enough. In the corridor outside, ICU 4 at 1124, Tatum was in blues, with a transit envelope in his hand. He stopped when she came out. He said, "Ma'am, they moved my orders. Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton, leadership track. ICU. HM2. Captain, I don't... HM2. Yes, ma'am. You wrote what you saw, HM2. You did the right thing the first time, and the second time, and the third time. You will keep doing it. Now go to Pendleton." Breyer was at the elevator at 11:31 when she walked past. He had just come from the 7th floor admin office. He had a printed sheet in his hand. The sheet was an orders modification. The orders modification named him SOST liaison at the combat center for the next exercise rotation. He held the sheet out to her, half folded, the way a doctor hands another doctor a chart they both already know the contents of. He said, "Hank wrote it this morning." She said, "Reese." He said, "Hollis." They did not say anything else. The elevator opened. He stepped on. She watched the doors close. If you have ever sat at the end of a story like this and felt the thing that lifts inside your sternum when the right person finally walks into the right room, hit the subscribe button. Stay with us. The next story is already on the table. The SOST team briefing room at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was dark on Friday night, the 15th of May, at 2146 local, except for a single ceiling lamp over a long plywood briefing table. The table was empty. Ainsley sat on the edge of the table in green utilities, the small gold oak leaves on her collar, her boots off and on the floor beside her, a black coffee in her left hand. She looked at the empty room. She looked at the team photograph on the wall. In the photograph, Maris Voigt was on the right end of the back row. Dark eyes, half a smile, her left hand resting on Salinas' shoulder. The photograph was dated 2022. Voigt had been off the net since 2023. Her phone vibrated on the table beside her right hip. She picked it up. The screen said, "Unknown." She opened the message. The message was one line. Trauma. 1. Heart wants you in Sanaha by Thursday. The kid lived. She read it twice. She did not move for a long time. Then she set the phone down on the table, face up, screen still on. She reached for her left boot. She began to put it on. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.